Hey, this is Clinton and Hillary, and welcome to BlackLantic. We are an East Coast podcast bringing Black East Coast voices to the world.
We're still in person, and this week it's day 2 now of Black History Month, or as we've been calling it, Black Lit Month. And our podcast is weekly, guests and topics. You can find us anywhere online by searching BlackLantic.
This week, oh, no, never mind. Go ahead.
We're capable.
And candid. Candidly capable.
Candidly CNC.
Let's get started. So it is Black History Month.
Yes.
All around the world. And this is the month where everyone pays attention to Black people. However, in schools and other places across Canada, Black history isn't something that is really focused on or taught. It's more of a gesture or a tokenization.
Mm-hmm.
The number one complaint we typically hear of from people being educated in schools is that all Black History Month ever was to them was learning a little bit about Martin Luther King and learning a little bit about Rosa Parks, the woman who refused to sit at the back of the bus and I believe sparked the civil rights movement.
Yes.
In the United States. Not even Canadian history, to be honest with you. So
I mean, it's only been recently that we've learned more about like Viola Desmond before she became the face of the $10 bill, and like many other prevalent people. I think with our organization, the Malakela Foundation that we just talked about, other organizations amongst New Brunswick, all of the Atlantic provinces, there's so many. It's become a bigger push not to just recognize Black people in February and not just to recognize the past and history, but to really shed light on innovators, creators, change makers, and regular Black people that just by being Black, you were fighting the good fight every single day and making the world a better place just by persevering.
Yeah. So when you use the term like Black in reference to people, I think what you're really talking about is Africans after they were brought to North America. To be honest, the term Black didn't exist in history. I've heard that it was invented by the Portuguese, the difference between black and white. Even in ancient texts, like I'm talking 1400s, 1300s, 1500s, white people didn't even call themselves white. There was no white and black. This is a term that was created. It was created to make a divide between cultures and to sort of justify the mistreatment of human beings. But that's neither here or there. But Black people have been here in Canada for hundreds of years, almost as long as white people. And there are texts that hint, that suggest that actually Africans traveled to North America even before Europeans. There are texts that reference that when Europeans came to North America, the indigenous people there referenced how years and years and years ago, people with Black skin used to come over to North America to trade in their boats.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of texts that say that Africans were great shipbuilders, and there is a current that goes from Africa to North America that you could basically sail there really easily. That's all getting really deep, and that's all for something else. But basically what I'm trying to say is Black history is Canadian history, and it should be something that's talked about year-round, not just in February. One thing we talk about a lot is that Black history needs to be integrated into our year-round curriculum. And become part of the thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with the Continuum, with the New Brunswick Conservative government? Surprise, surprise. But yeah, Hillary and I have been involved in something in the past couple of years.
We'll talk a little bit about it, and we do want to have the person who brought us on board on the podcast, Kate Chadette, who's been an amazing leader in all of this. Basically, we were asked to help build the New Brunswick Black Histories Continuum based off of the one that has already been created for Indigenous histories. It has a specific name, the Indigenous one, the Wallace.
I'm not gonna.
I forget.
I'm not gonna try to
the
say
Wabanaki.
It's
the Wabanaki
okay.
one.
Yeah.
Anyway, based off of that, we've been able to collate resources, share our opinions, and put ideas together that really summarize what we think all students of all races and colors should be taught from kindergarten till grade 12 in the Anglophone school district here in terms of what race looks like, and that can be, teaching littler kids about the color rainbow of human beings, and just proper words, and how to be inclusive, and little things like that, versus getting more in depth into some of the harsher realities that Black people face as kids are older and able to digest that. But also, and most importantly, Black joy, those innovators and creators and change makers that I talked about, and things that aren't just so heavily rooted in Black traumas, but also rooted in just the existence of Black people in different places, the diaspora, the African diaspora to, is that how that works? African diaspora to the Atlantic provinces, the slave trade, but also, people from all walks of life, and like all of the different countries, and how they maybe ended up in the Atlantic provinces, and then how Black people in the Atlantic provinces live today. So it's been an amazing process to build the continuum, to look at the resources, and the fact that, and why I think we really want to speak to Kate, is because she is a white woman who has been extremely culturally sensitive to all of our opinions, all of our ideas, has really just been a mediator who has let Black people from various organizations and various walks of life in New Brunswick speak about what their concerns are in this continuum, what they think should be in it, and why, and sort of has just really let us be the focal point, while just making sure that everything is done in an adequate way, and with the framework in mind that she knows much better than us, because that's her job. And it's been an honor. Yeah. And it was also an honor to see that was basically a recommendation in Manju Varma's Commissioner of Systemic Racism's report. It was great to see that recommended, and then us be like, well, we did it, girl, we did it. Yeah. It's gonna be out. We did it.
We are going to draw some interesting references to that report at some point in the episode as well. But as our channel grows and expands, we are going to get better at focusing on other provinces within Atlantic Canada. But today we're going to talk about Black people in New Brunswick and some of the history. Hillary had made a contact over the years that is now kind of a contact of mine too, but someone that we are like so grateful for.
Meredith Batt, our lovely friend.
They have been able to provide us with amazing historical references to Black people in New Brunswick. Black people in New Brunswick, the historical texts date back to, I think, the late 1700s, when Black people first arrived. Many as slave, some as freed Black loyalists from the civic civil war in America. Some that were freed by the United Kingdom and such. But Black people are spread out really interestingly. we didn't script
We're
this very
spread
well.
out. Yeah. Interesting.
Well, okay, so a lot of the Black people that had been in New Brunswick for that long, they first touched ground in places like St. John, New Brunswick, and trickled out from there. And I think there are other places in New Brunswick where there were small Black communities. Yeah. We are primarily based in Moncton, New Brunswick, and it's interesting because a lot of the Black folk here, a lot of them do come directly from West Africa as students who went to the university. And even as far as a decade or 2 decades ago, students would typically go to university, and then they would either go back to Africa or, they'd move to Montreal or Toronto. But we're seeing nowadays a lot more West Africans making New Brunswick their home as well. There has been an influx of immigration from places like Toronto and Montreal and the States. So Moncton's Black population is somewhat new, whereas the real heritage comes from St. John. But still, it speaks to the point that it's so weird to call us all Black people, because we're from so many different countries, so many different places in the world, different cultures and foods and musics and tastes and stuff like that.
And I've talked a bit about this before, because I was actually having a voice note conversation with somebody about the realities of like Black people in the States, and it sort of spawned from a conversation about the Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith's family and Red Table Talk, and somehow we got on this topic that the way I feel about Black Canadians is that there isn't the same common thorough thread of trauma as there is for Black Americans. And so it feels in a way that through this trauma, they've all really bonded over something. Whereas here, because they come from all walks of life, but are still mainly being assimilated by the systems in place. They're all fighting to preserve their culture, but we're not all getting to know each other. And so we even talk about, like, within New Brunswick, we have so many organizations that are all sort of doing the same thing, but it's because Black people are in these like segregated little pockets and areas. And it's like, how do you connect them all? Because, you know, we've got the Farron family farms who we've interviewed and who's gone through a lot, but they're of Jamaican descent, but Black from Toronto. And so they get sort of some hate for being Ontarioans, some hate for being Black people. And then you've got other Black people that have come from Jamaica and came straight to Moncton and have slightly different realities, but are facing similar racism. And it sucks that racism is the thing that is tying us all together, but it's not a shared trauma. It just feels like a battle that we're all overcoming. And so it's hard to share the Black Canadian history when it feels like they're little thumbtack pinpoints, when really there's Black people everywhere. It's just that we might not all have the same, I perceive it to be the same lack of knowledge about our roots, as well as the same trauma in our roots to bind us all together. Because it's sort of the like conversation around doing 23andMe and why some Black people are hesitant because of the trauma of actually not knowing where you come from. I don't have that. I know I can follow the lineage to Senegal, and I can follow the Acadians straight to their colonizing land of France. And so that's not a thing for me that I could connect to another Black person with. Whereas for the majority of Americans, they have that. They have the fact that last names are their slave masters' last names, and that there's all of this trauma, and it, in a weird way, brings them closer. And I feel like we often are not as close as Black Canadians. And all of that to say, that's how I feel about like learning so much of the Black history, that it is St. John and Fredericton area, whereas Moncton, it's like I can't find the history.
It's and maybe there's not a lot there. I mean, we've uncovered numerous stories from the archive of places all over New Brunswick or Sackville, Moncton, stuff like that, but a lot of it does take place in St. John. And I think you wanted to start off by talking about is it the NBAACP, or are we doing the, okay.
I'll talk a little bit about the NBAACP, and I will say that this episode should come out in the middle of us doing a 3-part series on CBC, and we also have a bunch of other cool things, so we will be going like in depth in various ways on all of the platforms, and I think we should probably share the resources after. And if you do look up archives, they have a document about all their Black history content, so it is available to the public. We just happen to have an insider. But I'll start with the NBAACP, which I did not know existed, and it does claim to have an American counterpart, which could very well be the NAACP without the New Brunswick.
There's a relation there for
sure.
There
probably is, but essentially in 1959, the NBAACP was founded, New Brunswick Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They had an interracial structure, which meant that there were white members on the board and not all Black people, which did cause some very interesting questioning by people who questioned the existence of the organization. They did some work focusing on discrimination in housing sales and rentals in St. John that actually accumulated in the Provincial Human Rights Act. And they also helped in 1783 when Loyalists arrived in the Maritimes, because slavery at that point had been accepted. And so there were actually 4 military families that had 6 slaves each. Through their research, they found out that there were 1,232 slaves in the Maritimes by 1784. The majority at that time were in Nova Scotia. However, what this led to, and you can read a bit about this in a book called Blacks in New Brunswick, which we will be giving away a copy, but you can also get a copy for $15 through St. Thomas University. And I'll try to remember to put in the description the link to that, because they do have like a website with a phone number. But essentially a Black lieutenant reached out to, I believe, France, where a lot of these military families had come from, and essentially said, like, all of these freed men who fought in this war were promised proper land where they had to, within 3 years, like, actually grow agriculture and cultivate their land and the acres in that area. But they were purposely given land that was not feasible for this task. They were lied to. Shocking. So this Black lieutenant, who was, highly regarded, essentially said, I would like to then take these people away from here. Like, if you're not going to give them the proper tools and the resources and you're going to lie to them and make their lives difficult, I would like to allow them to leave. And so became the birth of the Sierra Leone Company. The government of France allowed this Black lieutenant to create this company and essentially ask all of the freedmen and women who would like to leave New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and actually build a new home in the country of Sierra Leone in Africa. And hold on. I believe it was in.
While you're looking that up, that's so weird and ironic in the sense that, I mean, this is one of the only times in history where, you know, Black people who were stolen from Africa actually went back to Africa, because that's a really common thing that hateful racist white people will say all the time. Go back to Africa. Why don't you go back to Africa? And the response is like, where? Like, where do I go? I don't know where I'm from. I don't know where my ancestors were from. Like,
on January 15th, 1792, 1,180 freedmen and women from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick sailed out of Halifax Harbor to Sierra Leone. And actually, now that I remember what you were saying, in terms of telling Black people go back to where you came from and them actually going back, they weren't originally from Sierra Leone. That's the thing. I'm 99% sure in the book that they're part of like the Jamaican Maroons and Loyalists. So you've got a group of Jamaicans trying to make a home in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia.
They're like, this is shit. We don't like this. We don't want the renters. People are treating us like crap. You gave us shitty land. Yeah.
So if you're a Black person watching from Sierra Leone, are you Jamaican though? Because you should check that out. You might actually just be like super into oxtail and really Jamaican. And you maybe spend some time in New Brunswick. Like, check your roots. Do you find, like, sometimes your skin gets, like, eczema? That's the white. That's your presence in New Brunswick. It's a joke.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because, the Jamaican... Okay, I get the joke.
I'm trying to reference how they would be able to palpably tell that at some point a summer was spent in New Brunswick. Like, a small inkling of racist time.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it would be a dry patch.
Interbred? Like... Acadians and Indigenous. I don't know a lot about Sierra Leone, but that's a great question. And I guess like my point is that they literally would just prefer to go to
anywhere.
An unknown country in Africa than stay here. Like, that's how bad the conditions must have been. They were like, okay, we came from down there, up there, F it, like let's go to Africa.
Exactly. And slavery was only abolished in New Brunswick in 1833. So anyone who tells you slavery wasn't here, the Underground Railroad, blah, 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 sort of untrue. The NBAACP also helped people apply for land grants for 70 people in St. John, which gave them 55 acres, which contributes to why there were so many Black people there, out of the people who remained from not taking that opportunity to go to Sierra Leone. And something that we will be talking about more in depth on CBC is the fact that on October 6th, 1849, 2 Negro schools in St. John were founded and continued operation until the turn of the century. We will be speaking in depth about Ottenabog School, which from my records ceased to exist, I believe, in like between 1905 and 1908, but there continued to be correspondence about it until 1915 because one of the main people running the school passed away, which resulted in there just being no teacher or education for these Black people, like 60 to 70 students for 3 whole years, but then they talk about it for like a decade and no one ever teaches these Black people anything. And then you wonder why there's poverty and all of these things. And it's because they weren't given a fair chance because they didn't want a white teacher to move into the Black community. Other teachers didn't want to travel to work or teach the Black people, and they didn't find any of the Black people smart enough to teach them. But then I found history of 2 Black teachers that actually did graduate from UNB with honors in the early 1900s and had to move because there were apparently no job opportunities. But there was. Isn't that interesting how that works? Government of New Brunswick. Sorry, in my head I'm like, blame Higgs. Blame Higgs. Just blame him. Right?
Don't give him a sneak peek about the clothing line coming up. Insane history.
Right?
I mean, I don't even know. I'm still thrown off by a little something that happened a few minutes ago. But yeah, so there is a deep-rooted history of Blacks in New Brunswick, and there are publications and there's books on the topic, of course. But that's really interesting, and I don't think I don't think many people know about that kind of stuff, and so I hope that information that we've uncovered and you've uncovered in research through Meredith Batt will helped to open some eyes.
Yeah.
There are some other interesting New Brunswick news that a lot of people would like to deny and probably not talk about. And I won't say that this is Black history, but it does definitely speaks to the Black experience in New Brunswick. And, when I talk about the years and the time frames, pretty shortly after, I'm going to talk about how what seems like a really long time ago
Isn't.
generationally is kind of like is
No.
just like yesterday. So in the like early 1920s, maybe even the late 1910s, the Ku Klux Klan was formed in America. And one of their prerogatives, for anyone who doesn't know, is that they didn't like immigration. They didn't like anything that challenged traditional conservative views of the American people. It didn't take long from that time in America for the Ku Klux Klan to make its way to Canada. And of course, there are lots of historical documents about them existing in Ontario, in Manitoba, in the West Coast, and of course in New Brunswick. So the Ku Klux Klan was formed in New Brunswick in about 1925. And I mean, they were really exclusionary of anyone else. In fact, they even had major problems with Roman Catholics. They didn't like the idea of anyone that wasn't part of like a traditional Christian religious coming in, anyone that challenged their views. Of course, they didn't really take kindly to the Black people who were in New Brunswick. And the idea of immigration, anyone from away. And it's funny because, again, there is sort of still that attitude existing today, which I'll get into in a minute. But it wasn't just one organization. The Ku Klux Klan actually ended up having 17 different chapters throughout New Brunswick. They were in areas like Quebec, Woodstock, East Florenceville, Heartland, two in Victoria County, Aroostook Junction, and Plaster Rock. Four in York Community, meaning like Fredericton, the most racist city in New Brunswick. Sorry, it's true. Canterbury, Macadam, Napodogan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, St. Stephen, St. John, Sussex, Chipman, Moncton, Campbellton, and Fredericton Junction. So actually, these documents, really interesting, in September of 1988, these records were found by a worker behind wallboards in Quebec, New Brunswick. So that means that for whatever reason, someone had put these documents in between walls
And literally
of a
seal them
house.
away.
Yeah, literally sealed them away. Now, there's different reasons for that.
Shame.
Could be shame, could be hiding them. I've heard many stories, especially with all the people coming to New Brunswick in the past couple of years, of like doing renovations and construction on old houses and finding all these interesting things in between walls. Sometimes it could have been as simple as attempts at insulating. Sometimes people were just trying to insulate.
I'm gonna warm up my house with these KKK documents.
Well, I have friends in like Dorchester, New Brunswick, who found like newspapers from like the Toronto Star or whatever from like the early 1900s in between walls, and I don't think anyone was hiding that out of shame. I mean, it wasn't the Toronto Sun. If you're from Toronto, you get that. Yeah, so these were found and boarded up behind a wall in Quebec, New Brunswick. They were forwarded to the Fredericton RCMP. They were then transferred to the archives of the RCMP in Ottawa, and then they were given to the Provincial Archives in New Brunswick. But so these organizations had a strict code of hierarchy in which they were to be very secretive and be very careful. They worked within government organizations, had religious affiliations, but their goal was to keep the purity of the Anglo-Saxon race.
A hierarchy of offense, which drunkenness and bad behavior were grounds for suspension. Like, y'all just needed a release. You just needed a good time. Like a bunch of white people who can't get drunk and can't have fun. Yeah, have a drink. Don't burn people on a cross. Calm down.
That's funny. I wasn't
have a shot.
I wasn't going to bring up the fact that it was like, they're so hateful towards all these other organizations, but having a drink was a bad thing. But when you put it in that context, maybe they should have just had a little shot of some gin or something.
Kiss a lady or something. Like, chill. With her consent. You're supposed to be pure.
But that's kind of the contradiction of it all. So drunkenness and bad behavior were grounds for suspension within the Ku Klux Klan. However, burning crosses, hating people because they had different skin colors or came from different places in the world or had different beliefs, that's good behavior. That is grounds for promotion.
And I don't know where you're going with all of this, but I did want to point out, because I knew about this from a different document that Meredith had sent us in the past, that it does say revealing the working of this order, meaning the KKK, to aliens and even to Roman Catholics was met with banishment forever. Because from my understanding, the foundation of this was actually to hate. They were all Protestant who hated the Catholics, but then they lumped in the blacks, and so they weren't like founded, from my understanding, in New Brunswick out of actually hate for black people.
No,
they
not
just
at all.
got relegated onto the list of, and we also don't like you.
But again, it started with Roman Catholics, but the pure message of them was to keep out anything that challenged their traditional conservative, what is it, Protestant?
I believe so, yeah.
It's so, of course, yeah. Roman Catholics were the biggest threat to them.
Yes.
But so were black people. So were, they use the term aliens here, which means immigrants or anyone who is not from their land.
Yeah. Which again is funny, because you know who's actually from your land? The indigenous guys.
Yeah.
Indigenous people. It is not you.
Our friend Lily Lynch commented on that recently in one of our posts, how, like, imagine all these people being hateful about people coming to land that wasn't even theirs to begin with.
Yeah.
My point with all of this is similar to slavery existing in New Brunswick and people either not wanting to believe that or recognize that or acknowledge that that was a reality, is that the reality is that the Ku Klux Klan existed in New Brunswick from 1925 to 1930. They actually existed much longer than that. So the Ku Klux Klan started around 1925, and they existed up until about the start of World War II, when, you know, global distractions, different needs, the fact that they had to reorganize society to fight a war, the Ku Klux Klan kind of fizzled out. But there was 17 different chapters in New Brunswick. And the thing about that is, just because they are not openly operating anymore, it does not mean that the people who held those beliefs suddenly changed their beliefs and no longer felt this way towards outsiders. So we're talking about 1940, 1930, 80 to 90 years ago. And while that may seem like a long time, it's not, because if you are alive today and you have a grandmother who is alive and is possibly in their 80s or their 90s or something like that, there is a very high likelihood that that grandparent of yours, when they were a child, so if you are alive today and you have children who are 5, 6, 7, or 8 years old, who spend time with an 80-year-old grandparent, when your kids spend time with anyone, especially your grandparents, they learn attitudes, belief systems, and other things from them. So if you have someone who's alive who is 80, when they were a child, when they were a kid, when they were 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, they would have been, spending time around their grandparents who would have been adults or grandparents in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. So that's really only one generation of knowledge passing on. So you could have people teaching your kids today who were alive when their grandparents were grandparents in the 1930s, teaching them things, passing on certain beliefs and negative systems.
And I think that, like, in what you're saying, which is like only slightly confusing.
Is it?
Well, because I think, like, the way you're positioning it is as if almost like those grandparents could have been racist and taught that their grandchild, which is now teaching your grandchild, but also
that's literally exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, but also in theory, like, your children's grandparents could have just been like 5 and hanging out with the KKK. Their grandparent could have been in the KKK. Their mom could have been, because they're that 5.
Literally,
yeah,
what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think we're saying it in 2 different ways.
Yeah, maybe I was saying it in a really long, drawn-out way.
Because, like, my mom was born in 1950, so she was only 20 years away from these people would have still been alive. Like, I don't think that these people were necessarily 90 while they were in the KKK. They could have been 20 or 30 and only been, like, 50 when my mom was born, and could have been, like, her boss or her teacher or her anything. So, like, in the idea of the generational knowledge being passed, it's not only that, it's just that, like, there is a Venn diagram in which these people were all probably inhabiting this provincial space at the same time.
Well, yeah,
Well, we do because of
in a more simplistic way, that's basically what I'm saying. The way generational knowledge passes down. I mean,
Yeah.
the nursery rhymes you listened to when you were a child, those have been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Your grandparents sang them to them, your parents sang them to you, and those came from hundreds of years ago. Views and beliefs, they get passed down really easily. And I'm not saying that the grandparents were there like indoctrinating children into hatred, but it wasn't that long ago is my main point.
Yeah.
So Ku Klux Klan was in New Brunswick. Did you talk about your two things in tangent to each other, the NAACP and the school system and stuff like that? Because I mean,
well, we're gonna talk about it more, obviously, on the other things that we get to do this month, CBC, and the other one I want to wait to share.
No worries.
But no, so essentially, in terms of the timeline, you've got the Sierra Leone company coming in. You've got the creation of the Otnabog School and another Negro school in Woodstock. And that eventually led to the creation of the NBAACP. And they sort of all reference each other in reports in terms of how to better the St. John area. And they talk about the poverty in St. John, the lack of career opportunity, being given unskilled jobs, and how Black people are supposed to have any justice or be able to survive in those conditions. And I find it really interesting because it's very similar to the way we are still speaking. What Manju Varma's report on systemic racism. I want to say that the report is on the commissioner, and then I remember she is the commissioner. But anyway, her reporting sounds very similar to things that they were saying in 1960. And so in the last 70 years, nothing's changed. New Brunswick, get it together.
That's what I was asking. Yeah. So that's the same parallel too, right? Not much has changed. Not much has changed, and it's because this kind of change takes time. It takes time to weed out generational influences. More
generations than the like 4 that we were just outlining.
In a really roundabout way, that's what I was trying to say. Like generational change takes time. Like grandparents teach grandkids, those grandkids grow up and they teach their grandkids, and it just takes time. Same thing with like overcoming like generational trauma. It takes time because the trauma can be passed down.
And we also talk about it in the sense of like financial opportunity, getting grandfathered in. Part of the problems around like Juneteenth and the like Black Wall Street in the States and all of these things is that like when you lose out on opportunities like that, it will take centuries plural to get back to a place like that. And if everything in the system is disenfranchising you and pushing you back and a systemic barrier, it is that much harder. So it's not shocking that we're still discussing a poverty issue that actually started the minute these Black loyalists came and were given disproportionate land and poor resources in 17 something that led to 1850 with these Negro schools. Like it's all one cumulative race. It's one racism that's been committed to a bunch of people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I always call it a racism. I'm like, I've suffered a racism today.
Yeah, that's a thing. But no, again, generationally, like one of the greatest things that a parent can pass on to their children, other than knowledge, but when they pass is assets or money or things like that, and that usually can come in the form of property or land or the sale of a home. So I'll just say it, like white people nowadays that are educated, have their own job, but at some point a parent probably passes on and leaves them something, and that could be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars that will make the people of today, the young people, I'll just say the white people of today, because that is the majority of people who, that gives them a real leg up, that gives them a real advantage over people who don't have grandparents or don't have parents who had the opportunity back in the day to acquire assets, acquire property, acquire homes. Usually by law they weren't even allowed to, so they didn't have anything to pass on to their own children to give them a leg up in life. And so again, it's not as easy as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and there are these like one-off cases where people are able to do that, but right from the get-go there is a huge disadvantage. slavery existed in New Brunswick up until the 1830s or so, and then after that
1833,
there
I
was
said.
still indentured servitude that took place after that. Because just because you were freed from being a slave, it doesn't mean suddenly you're going to be offered a good job or a good chance at education, like we've seen in what Hillary was just talking about.
What was it that teacher said? You don't have to
You
you
don't
don't
have to
have to like
like black
niggas, but
people.
you don't
Just
have just don't tell them you don't like them.
yeah, you just don't use that word in front of them. You can
Yeah,
use the N word, just don't use
similar
it in front of
energy.
black people. But again, not so much in Moncton, but in other places in New Brunswick, like the effects of slavery are still prevalent. And to anyone who thinks that slavery didn't exist in New Brunswick, you just have to go to the archives.gnb.ca, find the search engine, and there are pages upon pages of references
Yeah.
to slaves, slave owners, newspaper articles saying that they are looking for their runaway slaves, talking about well, there's bad stuff in here too.
Yeah. There's also, I noticed a couple of instances, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but where there's been like a violent occurrence, let's say, between a black man and
That's what
someone.
I was gonna say. Bad things. It's all bad things, but like
But
black people.
But they also like just like they don't just say
Assaulting.
this black man did this thing. They're like, this black man, a slave, did this thing, and it's sort of like how we say now, why do you have to reference color? Then it's like, well, why you gotta say I was once a slave in the States? I just got mad about this one thing. Like it feels like a lot of passive aggressive digs at the black community all of the time, in terms of runaways and things like that. There are a couple of heartwarming stories in there as well. There is a black man who had passed away who was a slave in the States, who ended up owning a business in St. John and passing away at 77. And he seems to be quite like honored quite well in the newspaper article about him. And even the teacher at Ottenabog School had taught there until 1873 for years, and the wife and daughter wanted to keep the school going, and that's sort of the start of the problem. But he seemed to be very well loved by the community as that teacher as well. So we know the black people were doing good things.
I mean, and I wouldn't say this is like a nice thing, but there's even references for wills and people's wills when they pass away. Like they will leave things to their slaves, like they will leave money to their slave, or the woman who, or it'll say like the black woman who lived with me, and stuff like that. Yeah, that could mean a lot of different things. So I won't say that's nice. I won't say it's nice that they had slaves and they left them something, but
at the time it was nice to be left something.
What's really important in this sort of improv episode that we're doing, and which as we continue through the years, hopefully get much better at this, is that black people have a long, deep, rich historical heritage in New Brunswick, and are just as much a part of New Brunswick as any Anglo-Saxon or anyone else. Their history is important. It deserves to be known and learned and acknowledged. And, you know, Black History Month should really just be an integration of all this knowledge and information into Canadian history. Black people are Canadians, and Black history is Canadian history. And if you don't take anything else from this, again, sort of rough episode, but information-packed episode, it's just that as you're going through Black History Month this month, just remember that Black people have been here just as long as anyone else, and they deserve that same acknowledgement and respect.
And if you want to learn any more about all of these resources or look at them on your own, Archives of New Brunswick website, archives.gnb.ca. You can email us, and we're willing to share the links and actually the document as well that we've had. Some of the photos of the documents will be shared on CBC as our discussions, I believe, are aired, which is very exciting. We're talking about them as if we've recorded them. We haven't yet, because we just know we're going to be so good at it.
We keep saying CBC, and we will, but we're also, I think you're going to be on Rogers TV as well, so you'll be able to catch that not only on the radio, but on Rogers Television. We'll be posting more about that on our channels, and we will be posting Black history throughout the entire month. Absolutely. That is actual Black New Brunswick history, and as much as we can, we're going to dig into the Black history of PEI and Nova Scotia as well.
Yes.
But we don't necessarily have that inside link yet that gives us the rich access to this heritage.
But we're working on it. I have to do that research for something else.
We're two people.
But we're trying to be
no more. Budget, no pay. We don't get paid for this. It's just out of a calling.
Is this where we ask for our reparations?
You do it. You're so good at that.
Hi, are you a white person who feels that you've done something wrong to Black people over the course of your life? Are you a Black person who just likes our content? GoFundMe. Go fund us.
Go fund us.
Go fund us. No, but in all honesty, we are two people and we try to make this as fun and exciting and interesting as possible. And all of your money either goes back to our content creators and other writers and things, which we are continuing to grow and cultivate. We've just had a slow start to the year and we're working on the visual aspect, but your money goes only back into the company.
Yep.
Does not go into our
Social
pockets.
media scheduling, Restream, this new software that we're using, stuff like that. Our website where we host all of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a really cool thing you can do if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple is just please rate the episode and hit that follow button so you can be notified of the episodes coming out. If you're not already following us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, pick one of those channels.
YouTube, LinkedIn,
all of that. Thank you again for listening. This has been another episode of BlackLantic. I'm Clinton Davis.
Crabberry, Hillary LeBlanc, Black History Month. It's lit.